The Chicago skyline was a jagged crown of steel and glass, shimmering under the oppressive weight of a looming winter storm. It was late November, and the windy city was living up to its name. A brutal clipper system was blowing in from the north, carrying the promise of ice and bone-chilling cold. Inside the penthouse office of Sterling and Associates, located on the 64th floor of a prestigious LaSalle Street tower, David Sterling stared at a spreadsheet that seemed to vibrate with his own exhaustion. At 45, David was the personification of old money success, though he was a self-made man. He wore bespoke charcoal suits, drove a high-end electric SUV, and lived in a world of amortizations and equity buyouts. Yet as the clock ticked past 9 p.m., the silence of the office felt like a physical weight. His divorce 2 years prior had stripped his Gold Coast apartment of its warmth, leaving him with nothing but echoes and expensive Italian furniture that no one ever sat on. He was a man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. David rubbed his temples, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in his tired eyes. He had spent his life calculating risks and optimizing assets, but his personal life was a deficit he couldn't balance. He grabbed his heavy wool overcoat, wrapped a cashmere scarf around his neck, and headed for the private elevator. The descent was smooth and silent, a metaphor for his life, controlled, predictable, and profoundly lonely. As he stepped out into the biting wind of the parking garage entrance, the cold slapped him across the face. The city felt abandoned. But then he saw her. Tucked into a concrete alcove behind a row of industrial dumpsters, shielded only by a thin, discarded moving blanket, sat a woman. She was cradling a small bundle against her chest, a child, no older than 4, wrapped in a threadbare puffer jacket that was clearly too small. The woman's face was a map of exhaustion and terror. Her eyes were fixed on the street, darting toward every passing car with a frantic intensity. She wasn't looking for spare change. She was looking for a predator. She looked like a deer caught in the high beams of a hunter's truck. David usually kept walking. It was the unwritten rule of the urban elite. Maintain eye contact with the horizon, never the pavement. But the temperature was dropping to a lethal 18 degrees, and the child's small shivering frame caught the flickering light of a dying street lamp. The boy let out a wet, rattling cough that pierced through the howling wind. Something in David's rigid chest, a part of him he thought had died during the divorce, cracked open. He approached slowly, palms open to show he wasn't a threat. "It's going to freeze tonight," he said, his voice rusty. "The shelters are blocks away, and they'll be full by now. You can't stay here." The woman flinched, pulling the child tighter into her chest. Her knuckles were white, and her skin was translucent from the cold. "We're just resting," she whispered, her voice carrying a soft, rhythmic southern lilt, a Georgia accent that felt strangely out of place in the harsh, metallic environment of Chicago. "We'll move on soon. We don't want no trouble." "I'm not the police," David said, stepping closer, careful to keep a respectful distance. "My name is David. I live just a few blocks from here. I have a guest room. It has a heater, a bed, and a lock on the door. Just for tonight. If you stay here, the boy won't make it to morning." He saw the internal battle in her green eyes, the primal fear of a male stranger versus the biological necessity of keeping her son alive. She looked at David's polished shoes, then at his face. She saw the exhaustion there, a mirrored loneliness that perhaps made him seem less like a predator and more like a fellow ghost. "I'm Sarah," she said, her voice trembling, "and this is Leo. Please. Just for the night. We'll be gone before the sun is up." David nodded, his professional instincts screaming about liability and security protocols, while his human heart finally took the wheel. He led them to his SUV. As he opened the door, the car's interior lights illuminated the bruises on Sarah's wrists, purple and yellow marks that looked like the grip of a powerful hand. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago winter. He was opening his door to a storm far more dangerous than the one brewing in the clouds. The interior of David's penthouse was a minimalist masterpiece of white marble, dark oak, and floor-to-ceiling windows. To Sarah, it felt like she had stepped onto a movie set or another planet. She stood in the foyer, her worn, salt-stained sneakers leaving damp outlines on the polished hardwood. She looked down at the expensive rug, then at her own tattered clothes, feeling a deep sense of shame. "Don't worry about the floor," David said, sensing her hesitation. He felt an odd surge of nervousness. He was used to commanding boardrooms of 50 people, but hosting a fugitive mother and child made his hands shake. "I'll get some towels. The guest suite is down the hall to the left." He led them to a room that had seen no visitors in years. It was pristine, smelling of cedar and expensive linens. Sarah sat Leo on the edge of the king-sized bed. The boy was staring at a modern sculpture on the dresser, his eyes wide. "Is this a castle, Mommy?" Leo whispered, his voice small and congested. "It's just a house, baby," Sarah replied, but her eyes told a different story. She looked at the heavy mahogany door, checking the lock immediately. It was a reflex, a habit born of a life where doors were never safe. David watched her from the doorway. Now that they were in the light, the details of her condition were clearer. She wasn't just homeless. Her clothes were high quality but ruined, as if she had left a comfortable life in a desperate hurry. And then there was the bruise near her hairline, partially hidden by her matted blonde hair, a jagged mark that looked like it came from a ring. "There's food in the kitchen," David said. "I'm not much of a cook, but I have pasta, fruit, and some soup. Please, help yourself. I'm going to go into the den and let you get settled." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," she said. While Sarah bathed Leo, David sat in his darkened den, staring at the city lights. He felt a strange electric sense of purpose. He realized he didn't even know her last name, yet he felt a protective urge that surpassed logic. He went to the kitchen and prepared a simple tray, chicken soup he found in the pantry, sliced apples and some cheddar cheese. When Sarah finally emerged an hour later, she was wearing an oversized Chicago Marathon t-shirt David had left for her. Her hair was damp and brushed. Without the grime of the street, she was strikingly beautiful, but it was a haunted beauty. "He's asleep," she said, nodding toward the guest room. She sat at the kitchen island, eating with a refined grace that confirmed David's suspicion. This woman hadn't grown up on the streets. She ate as if she hadn't had a real meal in days. "Sarah," David said gently, pouring her a glass of water. "I'm a man who deals in facts. You don't have to tell me your life story, but I can see you're running, and I can see who you're running from." Sarah froze, an apple slice halfway to her mouth. She looked at the front door of the apartment, then back at David. The silence stretched between them, thick with the sound of the wind rattling the glass. "In my world, back in Blue Ridge, Georgia," she began, her voice cracking, "the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who own the law. My husband, Mark, he's not just a man. He's a detective. His father is the state senator. In that town, Mark is God. When I told him I wanted a divorce, he told me that I could leave, but Leo would stay, and that if I tried to take him, he'd make sure I was handled by the department." She looked at her hands. "I took Leo in the middle of the night. I left my car at a bus station 3 towns over to throw them off. I've been taking Greyhound buses for 2 weeks, paying in cash, sleeping where I can. I thought a big city like Chicago would be a good place to disappear." David felt a cold rage. He knew men like Mark, men who hid their rot behind badges and titles. "He'll have filed a kidnapping report," David noted. "He already did," Sarah whispered. "I saw it on a news clip at a gas station. I'm a fugitive now, that's why I can't go to a shelter. The minute I give my name, the system flags me, and Mark gets a phone call." David leaned back, his mind already spinning. "Then we don't give them your name. For now, you're my cousin visiting from out of town. Tomorrow we start building a wall around you that even a state senator can't climb." The sun rose over Lake Michigan the next morning, casting a cold, brilliant light across the apartment. David woke up on his leather sofa, his back aching, but his mind sharper than it had been in years. He smelled something miraculous, the scent of toasted bread and real coffee. He walked into the kitchen to find a transformed space. Sarah was standing at the stove, her movements efficient. Leo was sitting at the breakfast bar, coloring on the back of some of David's old printed spreadsheets, with a single blue crayon Sarah must have carried in her pocket. "You didn't have to cook," David said, surprised. It's the only way I know how to pay you back, Sarah said, a small, shy smile touching her lips. I found some eggs and bread. I hope you don't mind. Not at all. I usually just have a protein shake and regret, David joked, making Leo giggle. But as David sat down, he noticed Sarah's eyes constantly flitting to the windows. Every time a siren wailed in the distance, a common sound in downtown Chicago, she would visibly stiffen, her hand moving toward Leo's shoulder. We need to talk about the logistics, David said, his CFO persona taking over. If your husband is a detective, he's trained in skip tracing. He'll check bus manifests, CCTV, and credit card hits. Did you use any cards? No, only cash, Sarah said. But he's smart, David. He knows I love the cold. He knows I once mentioned how much I wanted to see the Art Institute. He's probably calling every precinct in the Midwest. David nodded. I have a friend, Marcus. He's a private investigator who specializes in high-asset divorces and sensitive family matters. He's ex-FBI. I want to bring him in. He can check if there's a warrant out for you in Illinois and how we can quash it. I can't afford a private investigator, Sarah said, her pride flaring up. You aren't paying, David said firmly. Consider this a pro bono project for Sterling and Associates. I have spent 20 years helping corporations protect their assets. It's about time I helped a human being protect hers. That afternoon, David did something he never did. He called his office and told his secretary he was taking a personal week. The shock in her voice was palpable. David Sterling didn't take days off, but as he looked at Leo, who was now driving a stapler across the coffee table, David realized that the merger he was working on, a multi-million-dollar deal, felt utterly insignificant compared to the safety of the two people in his living room. However, the peace was shattered when David's phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a southern regional outlet. The headline read, "Wife of decorated detective missing with child. Authorities believe she may be mentally unstable." They weren't just looking for her. They were preemptively destroying her reputation to ensure no one would help her. The hunt was intensifying. The next few days were a masterclass in covert operations. Marcus, the investigator, arrived at the penthouse under the guise of a grocery delivery. He was a silver-haired man with eyes that seemed to record everything. "Here's the situation," Marcus said, laying out a tablet on the dining table. "Mark Vance isn't just a cop. He's part of a dynasty in that part of Georgia. His father, Senator Vance, sits on the Judicial Committee. They've already flagged Sarah's ID nationwide as a missing endangered person. So if she gets stopped for jaywalking, she's in handcuffs and Leo is on a plane back to Georgia within 4 hours." Sarah sat with her head in her hands. "He's going to win. He always wins." "Not in my city," Marcus said, his voice like gravel. "But we have a problem. Mark Vance just requested mutual aid info from the Chicago PD. He's not stupid. He tracked your bus route to the Greyhound terminal on Harrison Street. He's been checking hotel registries. It's only a matter of time before he starts checking luxury high-rises if he thinks you found a mark to help you." David bristled at the word mark, but he knew Marcus was being realistic. To the outside world, Sarah looked like a grifter, and David looked like a lonely rich man being taken for a ride. "We need to move them," David decided. "I have a property in Logan Square. It's a brownstone I bought for investment. It's empty, under a shell corporation name. No one associates it with David Sterling." As they prepared to move, David saw Sarah packing their meager belongings back into her backpack. He walked into his bedroom and came back with a thick envelope. "Take this," he said. She opened it to find $5,000 in cash. She tried to push it back. "No, David, you've done too much." "Sarah, look at me," David said, his voice low and intense. "In my world, money is just a number on a screen. In your world, right now it's a shield. Use it to buy Leo clothes that fit. Use it if you need to run when I'm not around. Don't let your pride be the reason he gets caught." She looked at the money, then at David, and for the first time she let herself cry. She didn't cry like a victim. She cried like a soldier who had finally been given a weapon. They moved to the Logan Square brownstone under the cover of a snowstorm. As David drove the SUV through the slushy streets, he kept checking his rearview mirror. Every pair of headlights felt like a threat. He was a CFO who had spent his life avoiding risk, yet here he was, harboring a fugitive and loving every second of the purpose it gave him. The brownstone in Logan Square was different from the penthouse. It was cozy, with creaky floorboards and a fireplace that actually worked. For a few days they lived a life that felt almost normal. David would go out to get groceries and educational materials for Leo, while Sarah turned the house into a home. They spent long evenings talking by the fire. David told her about his childhood, how his father had been a powerful, controlling man who broke his mother's spirit with financial abuse, a term Sarah hadn't heard but immediately understood. He didn't hit her, David explained, staring into the flames. He just made sure she had no car, no bank account, and no friends. He made her a prisoner in a mansion. I watched her disappear. When she died, she was just a shell. I promised myself I'd never be like him, but in a way I was. I used my money to isolate myself from the world. Until I saw you. Sarah reached out and took his hand. You're nothing like him, David. A man like your father uses power to diminish people. You use it to grow them. But the shadow of Mark Vance was long. One afternoon, while Leo was napping, Sarah was looking out the front window. A black sedan with out-of-state plates crawled down the street. It stopped 3 houses down. A man got out. A man in a suit, holding a photo. He began talking to a neighbor who was shoveling snow. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She didn't recognize the man, but she recognized the cop walk. David, she whispered, her voice trembling. They're here. I don't know how, but they're here. David looked out. Stay in the basement. There's a hidden crawl space behind the laundry unit. Take Leo, now. David didn't wait. He walked out the front door wearing a casual hoodie, looking like any other homeowner. He started shoveling his own walkway, his heart hammering against his ribs. The man in the suit approached him. Excuse me, sir, the man said. He had a thick, honeyed southern accent. I'm a private investigator from Georgia. We're looking for a young woman and her son. She's not well. She took the boy from a loving home. Have you seen them? He held up a photo of Sarah. It was a photo from a gala. She looked happy, radiant. It was a clever tactic. It made her look like someone who belonged in a high-society home, not on the run. Sorry, David said, leaning on his shovel, his voice perfectly calm. I just moved in a month ago. Mostly keep to myself. Is there a reward? The man narrowed his eyes. There's a significant finder's fee from the family. Here's my card. If you see them, call me first. Don't call the local police. It'll just complicate the boy's recovery. David took the card. Southern Cross Security and Consulting. As the man walked away, David noticed he was wearing a ring, the same design of the bruise on Sarah's forehead. It wasn't a private investigator. It was one of Mark's brothers from the force. The hunt had moved from the digital world to the physical one. David retreated inside, locking the door and leaning against it. He could hear Sarah's panicked breathing from the basement stairs. He's gone, David said, though his voice lacked conviction. But he's in the neighborhood. They're canvassing. He immediately called Marcus. They found the Logan Square area. How? Mark Vance is a detective, David, Marcus replied. He probably pulled the records for every property owned by every high-net-worth individual who was in the vicinity of that parking garage the night Sarah disappeared. He's doing a grid search of your life. He knows you're the one. Then we need to stop playing defense, David said, his voice turning cold. What do we have on him? I've been digging into the Vance family's charity foundation back in Georgia, Marcus said. It looks like a classic money laundering front for the senator's campaign funds. And Mark? He's been using department-seized asset funds to pay for his private trips to Chicago. That's a felony. Misuse of public funds and crossing state lines to commit a crime. Is it enough to arrest him? David asked. In Chicago? Yes. In Georgia? No. We need to lure him into a situation where the Chicago PD or the FBI has to intervene. If he tries to take her by force on Illinois soil, he's done. David looked at Sarah, who had emerged from the basement, clutching Leo. She looked terrified, but there was a new spark of defiance in her eyes. "I won't be bait," she said. "You won't be bait," David agreed. "You'll be the trap." They spent the next 48 hours preparing. David leaked his location intentionally. He made a high-profile dinner reservation at a steakhouse downtown and accidentally used his personal credit card to pay for a toy store purchase near the brownstone. He was dangling a line, waiting for the predator to bite. But he knew that Mark Vance wouldn't come with handcuffs. He would come with a grudge. The confrontation didn't happen at a steakhouse. It happened exactly where Mark Vance felt most comfortable, in the dark. At 2 a.m. on a Friday, the back window of the brownstone shattered. David was waiting in the kitchen, sitting in the dark with a heavy iron skillet and his phone pre-dialed to Marcus. A man stepped through the broken window. He was tall, thick-necked, and moved with the arrogant confidence of a man who had never been told no. Mark Vance. He held a suppressed pistol in his hand, but he wasn't looking to kill, he was looking to reclaim. "Where is she, Sterling?" Mark whispered, his southern drawl dripping with malice. "You've had your fun playing hero. Now give me my wife and my son, and maybe I won't break your jaw." David stood up, the light from the street lamp catching his face. "You're a long way from home, Detective. Does your chief know you're using departmental ammo for a personal kidnapping?" Mark laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "I am the law in Blue Ridge, and out here, I'm just a worried father looking for his sick wife. The Chicago cops will take one look at my badge and help me load her into the car." "Try it," David said. Mark lunged, surprisingly fast for a man his size. He slammed David against the refrigerator, the wind leaving David's lungs in a violent rush. Mark pressed the barrel of the gun against David's throat. "You think your money makes you a man?" Mark hissed. "You're a suit, a soft, pampered little boy. I've broken tougher men than you for breakfast." But David wasn't looking at Mark. He was looking at the small nanny cam he had hidden in the spice rack, a camera that was live streaming to Marcus and a contact at the FBI's Chicago field office. "I don't need to be tough," David wheezed. "I just need to be recorded." Mark looked at the camera, and for a second his face went pale. In that moment of hesitation, the front door and the back door erupted inward. "FBI, drop the weapon!" The kitchen was suddenly flooded with tactical lights. Flashbangs echoed through the house, a disorienting roar. Mark Vance, the god of Blue Ridge, was tackled to his own knees, his face pressed into the linoleum he had just been standing on. The scene inside the brownstone was chaotic, a stark contrast to the silence that had reigned moments before. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone from the flashbangs and the cold draft blowing in from the shattered back window. David sat on the floor, leaning against the kitchen island, his hand pressed against his bruised ribs. Every breath felt like a jagged piece of glass, but the sight of Mark Vance pinned to the floor by 3 FBI agents was the best medicine he had ever received. "Check the perimeter!" an agent shouted. The heavy thud of tactical boots echoed through the house, a house that David had tried so hard to keep quiet and safe. As Mark was hoisted up, his expensive tactical jacket was torn and dusty. His eyes, usually so full of predatory certainty, were now wild with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He wasn't just losing a fight, he was losing the world he had spent his life dominating. "You're making a mistake," Mark bellowed, his southern drawl cracking under the strain. "I'm a decorated officer. That woman is a kidnapper. She's mentally unstable." "Save it for the federal magistrate, Detective," a tall agent replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "You crossed state lines with a weapon to commit a felony. We have the whole thing on a high-definition feed. You didn't just break the law, you gave us a front-row seat to the show." Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs. She was pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the banister, but she didn't look away. Leo was tucked against her side, his large noise-cancelling headphones making him look like a little astronaut. He was safe, shielded from the sounds of his father's downfall. She walked down slowly, each step a reclamation of her dignity. When she reached the bottom, she stood just 3 feet from the man who had haunted her dreams for years. Mark tried to lunge at her, a guttural snarl escaping his throat, but an agent yanked the zip ties upward, forcing him to his knees. "Look at me, Mark," Sarah said. Her voice was surprisingly steady, a low, resonant tone that filled the room. "For 5 years, I lived in your house. like a prisoner. I believed you when you said I was nothing. I believed you when you said the world would turn its back on me because you owned the streets." She leaned in closer, her green eyes burning with a cold, clear light. "But Blue Ridge is just a dot on a map. And you? You're just a small man in a very small cage. You didn't lose because I was strong. You lost because you were arrogant enough to think that kindness didn't exist in a city this big." Mark tried to spit, a final act of defiance, but the agent shoved his head down toward the floor. "Get him out of here," the agent commanded. As they dragged Mark into the cold Chicago night, the flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers danced across the walls of the brownstone. David looked up at Sarah. She was shaking now, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. He reached out his hand and she took it, her fingers ice cold but her grip firm. "Is it over?" she whispered. "No," David said, wincing as he shifted his weight. "The arrest is over. Now we start the war of the paperwork. But for tonight, yes, Sarah, you can sleep. Truly sleep." Recovery, David quickly learned, was not a destination, but a grueling marathon. While the physical bruises on his ribs faded into shades of yellow and green, the psychological scars Sarah carried required a different kind of labor. The battle shifted from the dark hallways of Chicago to the marble courthouses of Georgia. David didn't just hire a lawyer, he hired a phalanx. He assembled a team of the most aggressive civil rights attorneys and family law specialists in the United States. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, not just to protect Sarah, but to dismantle the infrastructure that had allowed the Vance family to thrive. In Blue Ridge, the Vance empire began to hemorrhage. With Mark in federal custody in Illinois, the wall of silence around Senator Vance's office crumbled. David's investigators found that the senator had been using his influence to suppress domestic violence reports not just for his son, but for several high-ranking donors. "It's a goldmine of corruption, David," Marcus told him over a secure line. "The Georgia SBI is jumping at this. They've been wanting to take the senator down for a decade, but they never had a catalyst. Sarah is that catalyst." Back in Chicago, the seasons shifted from the brutal ice of winter to the vibrant, hopeful green of spring. David helped Sarah find a sun-drenched two-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, overlooking the zoo. He didn't want her to feel beholden to him, so he structured the support as a humanitarian grant through a newly formed branch of his firm. "It's an investment, Sarah," he told her as they stood on her new balcony. "I'm an investor. I invest in assets that have high potential but are currently undervalued by the market. You are the most valuable asset I've ever encountered." Sarah started her nursing prerequisites at DePaul University. The transition was jarring at first. She was older than most of her classmates and carried a world of trauma they couldn't conceive of. But her southern, never-say-die work ethic made her a force of nature. She studied at the kitchen table until 2 a.m., the blue light of her laptop reflecting in eyes that no longer darted toward the door. Leo, meanwhile, was blooming like the tulips in Millennium Park. David had enrolled him in a specialized developmental preschool. The boy who had spent weeks in silence now talked incessantly about a boy named Sam and the big boats on the lake. For Leo's 5th birthday, David went against his minimalist nature. He rented a section of a private park and brought in a traveling petting zoo. He watched from the sidelines as Leo, wearing a birthday captain hat, laughed hysterically while a llama tried to eat his shoelaces. David felt a strange, tightening sensation in his throat. He realized he wasn't just watching a child play, he was watching the erasure of a nightmare. He felt a hand slip into his. "He's happy, David," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "He doesn't remember the bus stations. He doesn't remember the cold." "And you?" David asked, looking at her. "I remember," she said softly. "But I remember it like a movie I saw a long time ago. It's not my life anymore. This is my life." One evening in July, they sat at a small French bistro on a quiet street. The city was humming with life, the sound of distant jazz, the clink of wine glasses, the warm breeze carrying the scent of the lake. "I went back to the office today," David said, swirling the wine in his glass. "I sat in my chair and looked at the lake. I realized I spent 20 years calculating the depreciation of machines. I knew exactly how much a fleet of trucks would be worth in 5 years, but I had no idea what my own life was worth. He looked at Sarah. The bruises on her wrists were gone, replaced by a delicate silver watch David had given her for passing her first anatomy exam. I was a machine, Sarah. I was a CFO of a void. You gave me a reason to use what I have for something that actually leaves a mark on the world. I love you, David, she said. It was the first time she had said it without the shadow of gratitude or desperation. It was a simple statement of fact. I love you too, he replied, and I think I'm finally ready to resign from the void. A year had passed since the night in the parking garage. Chicago was once again under the spell of winter, but this time the snow didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a celebration. David Sterling's life was unrecognizable. He had stepped down from his role as CFO to become the chairman of the Sterling Vance Justice Foundation, a non-profit he had funded with a significant portion of his own wealth. The foundation didn't just provide shelters, it provided the full shield. It offered elite legal counsel, financial forensic accounting to find hidden assets in divorce cases, and long-term educational grants for survivors. He was using the tools of the 1% to fight for the 99%. The penthouse was no longer a cold monument to success. It was a home. There was a bright red plastic fire truck in the foyer. A pile of medical textbooks was stacked on the coffee table next to a half-finished puzzle of the solar system. The kitchen, once a place of protein shakes and regret, now smelled of Sarah's Georgia-style pot roast. It was Christmas Eve. The magnificent mile was a sea of twinkling white lights and shoppers wrapped in colorful scarves. David, Sarah, and Leo were at the Christ Kindle Market in Daly Plaza. The air was thick with the scent of roasted cinnamon almonds, bratwurst, and the steam from mugs of hot chocolate. Leo was perched on David's broad shoulders, his legs kicking with excitement. He was wearing a thick red parka and a hat with pom-poms that flapped in the wind. "Look, Dad, the tree is bigger than the buildings," Leo shouted, pointing at the towering evergreen in the center of the plaza. The word Dad still sent a jiver of electricity through David's spine. It had happened for the first time 3 months ago, during a soccer game, and it had stuck. It was a title David cherished more than any Executive of the Year award. He adjusted Leo's weight, feeling the sturdy reality of the boy's presence. "It is big, buddy," David said, smiling up at him, "but not bigger than you." Sarah was walking beside them, her arm linked with David's. She looked radiant in a cream-colored coat, her hair tucked under a beret. She looked like a woman who owned her future. The legal battles in Georgia were settled. Mark was serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison, and his father was under house arrest, his legacy erased. As they moved toward the subway entrance to catch the train home, David's eyes caught a familiar sight. A woman was sitting on a flattened cardboard box near the stairs. She was holding a small dog, trying to shield it from the wind with an old coat. Her sign read, "Anything helps. Lost my job. No family." The crowd pushed past her, a river of people in a hurry to get to their warm holiday dinners. A year ago, David might have been one of them, perhaps dropping a $20 bill out of a sense of distant duty, but never stopping. This time, David stopped. He lowered Leo to the ground and walked over to the woman. He didn't just reach for his wallet. He knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "It's a cold night for the dog," David said gently. The woman looked up, her eyes weary and guarded. "He's a good boy. He keeps me warm." David took out a $100 bill, but more importantly, he took out a small laminated card from his pocket. "My name is David. This card has an address on it. It's a center in the West Loop. If you go there tonight, tell them David sent you. They have a room for you and a kennel for the dog. And tomorrow there's a lawyer and a career counselor who want to talk to you." The woman stared at the card, then at David. Her hands began to shake. "Why?" David looked back at Sarah and Leo, who were waiting for him a few feet away. Sarah gave him a small, knowing nod. "Because someone opened a door for me once," David said, "and it changed the weather for the rest of my life." He stood up and walked back to his family. As they descended into the warmth of the subway station, the first heavy flakes of a true Chicago snow began to fall. The city was white, silent, and beautiful. David Sterling had started his journey as a man who knew how to save money. He ended it as a man who knew how to save souls, including his own. The lonely CFO was gone, replaced by a man who understood that the true measure of a person isn't found in what they accumulate, but in what they are willing to risk to keep others warm. The three of them stepped onto the train, leaning into each other as the doors hissed shut, moving together toward a future that was no longer a calculation, but a beautiful, unpredictable reality.